All right, good day, everyone. I am BJ Martino with the Terrence Group, welcoming you to this first presentation of the Advocus Poll, sponsored by Advocus Partners. Advocus Partners are a bipartisan, comprehensive advocacy services firm across the country and across multiple sectors. We are sponsoring this first survey, which will happen roughly on a quarterly basis, looking at the intersection of politics and issues across our country. We'll start off by looking at the political environment. These questions, many of you'll see on other public polling. Really, for us, it's a useful way to understand in the debate on issues that matter to American voters and are happening out there in the states. Partisanship plays such a large, outsized role in that it's important to set this table with looking at the environment on where voters are, not just on the presidency, but down ticket. We ask a two-way presidential ballot. Obviously, as we get into the fall, there are going to be other candidates, and there already are in several states. And in many ways, this survey looks not only nationally, but we oversampled voters in some of those 7 target states that are going to be critically important to the presidential campaign. Nationally, you can see the two-way ballot between Trump and Biden is split at 45%, a divided electorate. Trump has a 1-point edge in the target states that we're talking about. When we look at this ballot, it shows some of the themes that are emerging when you look across the polling. On the Democratic side, President Biden having some issues with some of those younger Democratic voters not quite entirely coming home. African-American voters are at 18 Trump to 69 for Biden. Hispanic voters 33 to 49 with a larger undecided. But you also see the problems that Trump and Republicans have been experiencing, particularly on education. Overall, college educated voters 42 to 50. When you look at college educated women, it gets worse for Trump, down to 37%, with 56% for Joe Biden. Independent voters, those who don't identify with either party, give Trump a slight edge right now, 36 to 31. But there still remain a third of those independents who are undecided, and that plays out in the targeted states. You may have seen in other polling and a discussion about the double haters, those who have an unfavorable view of both Trump and Biden. In this poll, we wanted to take a look at job approval. So looking not only at President Biden's current job approval, but asking voters to think back retrospectively to Donald Trump's time as president and whether they approved or disapproved of the way he handled his job. And you can see the responses here. 42% currently approve of the job Joe Biden's doing, 52% disapprove. For Trump, it's split 48-48. So when you look at the positives in terms of their personal images, you often get almost 2 out of every 10 voters who say that they have an unfavorable view of both. In this survey, asking it through the lens of job approval, we see 11% of voters nationally saying that they disapprove of both Biden currently and Trump back then. That 11%, that group climbs to 16% in those target states. And what's interesting about these voters, when you look at where they're behaving right now, if you only disapprove of Biden or only disapprove of Trump, you're pretty well lined up in terms of your vote decision. But right now, if you disapprove of both, on the 24 ballot test, Biden's leading 45 to 22. A lot of undecided out there. But we asked voters to also retrospectively look back to 2020 and ask us how they had voted in that election. Biden led those voters 61 to 20. So again, with some of the issues that you see that has been talked about in Biden's numbers and some of those weaknesses, that plays out with these disapprove both voters. Many of them are previous Biden 2020 voters who are currently undecided. And again, that group goes up not just 11% nationally, but they're 16% of voters in the target states. We asked as a follow-up to that, with the rise of these double haters and the disapprove both, What calculus are voters going to be applying down ticket? That's going to be critically important to watch. They're obviously control of the Senate, control of the House at play here. But with such a wide swath of voters making up their minds in these target states and in around the country, how are they going to then apply their views of who they're voting for or against for president? And when they come to a determination of who they think is going to win the presidency, do they want their candidate down ticket to be aligned with that choice of who they think is going to win, or do they want someone who is going to provide some sort of check and balance? This determination is going to come much later in the election year for a lot of these voters, but you can see in this question about control, 33% say they want Republican control, 34% Democratic control, 25% say they want some form of split control. 76% of those undecided on the presidential ballot say they want split control. 52% of those who disapprove of both Biden and Trump on those previous questions say they want split control. While there'll be other issues at play, clearly their views of who they vote for or against at the presidential level are going to be a determining factor in the late days of the election for Senate and Congress. We asked voters just to give us top of mind off a list some issues that may be important to them. Still, economic concerns and inflation driving a lot of the discussion in terms of top of mind for voters. 65% name it either the most important or next most important question issue for president and the Congress to focus on at the national level. You can see border and immigration, number 2 at 43%. What stands out is that when you look at Democratic voters, although economics are number 1, the next choice is a little bit more diverse. Other issues percolate up. For Democratic voters, healthcare, 37% named that first or second. Environment and climate change at 28%. Social Security and Medicare at 26%. When you look at Republican voters, it's very unified. 75% of Republicans are naming economy or inflation their number 1 or number 2 issue, and 65% naming border or immigration their number 1 or number 2 issue. That's it. Everything else is under 20% for Republicans. For independents, economics, border, and immigration still driving their number 1 and number 2. But you can see some other issues: Social Security, Medicare, and healthcare, an issue that already Democrats have begun to focus on and independents are beginning to pay some attention to. Honing in a little bit more on this issue of inflation and cost of living, we asked in a January survey whether voters thought that the worst was behind us. The same statement: while inflation and higher cost of living hurt my family, the worst is behind us now. At that time in January, 52% disagreed with that statement and only 25% agreed. You can see there is some softening of that now. 32% agree that the worst is behind us. 48% still disagree. So a plurality of voters nationally disagree with this notion. You can see bipartisanship. Democrats have moved much more positively in agreeing with the idea the worst is behind us. They were almost split back in January. Now 48% agree with this statement. The independent and others who don't align with either Republican or the Democratic Party have also improved, although still 49% disagree. And you can see Republicans have remained lock solid. 65% continue to disagree with this notion. You can also look, we asked self-identified class, upper middle, lower middle, or working and lower class. You can still see a very strong trend. Look how the upper and upper middle class more likely to say now that they agree with this notion, but still working lower class voters, fully 60%, still disagree with this notion that the worst is behind us. We then wanted to dive a little bit into views of ideas, and particularly in some industries across sectors in this country. The first thing, there's been a lot of talk, and we'll continue to see it in the political campaigns, about democracy. We wanted to just get an initial read. 64% of voters say they have a positive feeling toward our democratic system of government, but 31% are negative. You can see big partisanship at play here. Republicans 53 positive, 41 negative. But look at the age break. Where does that negativity come from? Younger Republicans, fully 50%, saying they have a negative view towards our democratic system of government. Meanwhile, for Democratic voters, fully 80% saying they are positive, but also some age breaks at play among Democratic voters. Younger Democrats still 74% positive, but that negative creeping up to 21. At the same time, we asked, it's not an antithetical statement, but not entirely aligned with democracy, a strong leader as president who acts without waiting for Congress. 59% feel positively towards that. And there's no partisanship at play here. It's 59% of Republicans, it's 61% of Democrats feeling positive toward this. Again, we didn't say which president we're talking about. We didn't put partisanship into the question. And without that, both Republicans and Democrats overall react as equally positively to that. Then we asked for some broad views of industries initially: big tech, pharmaceutical, oil and gas, health insurance, social media, and green energy. What stands out, a lot of these are split among voters. Green energy, the most positive, 61% initially have a positive view of green energy companies. There is clearly partisanship at play. Republicans split in terms of positivity and negativity. Democrats fully 80% positive towards green energy companies. At the same time, social media has the largest net negative at 61%, with only 33 positive. And we'll get into a little bit more on social media later. We took a little bit of a deep dive into voters' views of social media. Here you can see both Republicans and Democrats majority negative, a little bit stronger among Republicans. There's some other significant partisan differences here. You can see it sort of across the board. Oil and gas, not surprisingly, more positive for Republicans. Health insurance, pharmaceutical, big tech, all a little bit more positive among Democratic voters than Republican voters. Then we wanted to ask about just broad views on regulation and control of the power of big business at both the federal and the state level, and tested these two statements. The federal government should do more to regulate and control the power of big business. 64% of voters agree with that statement. Similarly, 61% agree that state government should do more to regulate and control the power of big business. What's interesting about this, you can look at the intensity on those. We asked as a follow-up, do you feel strongly about that? Only 29% feel strongly in agreement with that on the federal government level, 23% strongly on the state. And this reflects on both of these measures the growing populism that runs throughout both of our parties. If you saw our January survey, you remember that we had 71% saying we can't trust big business to act in the best interest of people, and 69% saying we can't trust government to act in the best interest of people. But what we're getting out of this measure is a sense of, yes, even with Republicans, 48% agree the federal government should do more to regulate and control the power of big business. Only 33% disagree with that statement. Clearly an article of faith at 82% among Democratic voters. Since tax day is coming up, we wanted to ask a couple questions on voters' views of the IRS and their own tax situation. Currently, 51% of voters have a negative view of the IRS or Internal Revenue Service as presented it to them. 42% have a positive view. When you look, not surprisingly, there is partisanship at play. Fully 63% of Republicans say they feel negative towards the IRS, whereas Democratic voters, 56%, are positive towards the IRS. Independents overall net negative. There's also a big class difference, as you see here. As you move outside of voters who identify as upper or upper middle class, views of the IRS turn net negative. Middle class voters 52, lower class 58, working and lower up to 52%. Now we asked the question, do you believe the wealthiest Americans do not pay their fair share of taxes? 72% agree with the statement, 47% strongly. It's a supermajority at 72%. It's a majority of Republican voters at 57%, although not with the same level of intensity. Democrats fully 87%. Independents, we've seen in many ways side with Republicans on other questions here. A little bit more closer to where Democrats are in terms of that 72% agreement with 41% intensity. So clearly there are class-based impacts here as well. You can see the intensity rise as you go from the upper and middle class voters to the working and lower class. That 55% strongly agree with this notion that the wealthiest do not pay their fair share of taxes, or are agreeing with the statement that they do not. Looking at their own tax filing right now, 41% believe they're going to get a refund from the IRS, 27% believe they'll have to pay more, and then the rest either neither or have no idea what to expect. What's interesting, there's no partisan difference here. Republicans and Democrats, both pluralities, expect to get refunds. When you look at class, significant differences. Upper and upper middle class voters expect they're going to have to pay more. 47% of self-identified middle class voters expect to be getting a refund this year. And then as you move into lower, middle, and working class voters, there's still a plurality saying they expect a refund, but you get more into saying either neither, and that there won't be either getting a refund or paying more, or just don't know what to expect yet. What's interesting here is that among those who, even though there's no partisan differences significantly among expecting a refund or paying more, those who will have to pay more to the IRS, Trump leads those by 3 points. And Biden leads those voters who expect a refund by 3 points. Not huge differences, but an interesting one given how equal they were partisan-wise. Emotions going into next week. We asked this list of emotions. The most common were relieved, how they'll feel when come to filing their own taxes. 15% frustrated, 13% anxious. In terms of categorizing these, about 35% overall are positive, including that relieved. 22% are in that nervous, anxious, or worried category, and another 22% frustrated or angry about paying taxes. Those who feel anxiety, those who feel negative towards paying their taxes, not surprisingly, bending a little bit more towards voting Trump than their 2020 perspective. That is going back and looking at asking them how they had voted in 2020 versus where they're voting now. Trump bends that by between a net 4 to 7 points across those two groups from where they voted in 20 to where they say that they are voting now. Okay. We asked a couple questions then. There's been considerable discussion about foreign-owned businesses in our country, as well as we have 37 states have introduced bills about limiting land ownership by foreign entities. And we wanted to ask this question. Generally speaking, how do you feel about foreign investment coming to your state? Not giving voters a lot of information here, just saying that foreign investment means companies from other countries that expand their operations into your state or purchase existing companies to operate in your state. Without any sort of framing or other information, a 41% plurality of voters are negative towards foreign investment coming to their state, 29% positive, and then a large 30% saying that they're unsure. So framing of this clearly matters because we've seen polling in other places about specific instances of foreign investment that have been positive. But here in this context, and after what some of the national discussions happen, generally we see more negativity. Not surprisingly, partisanship, but also age and gender and education level all play a role in terms of shaping these initial responses. You look at some of the groups that are most positive, including younger men at 47%, older women age 55 plus dropped to only 15% positive with 56% negative. There's that partisanship at play. A majority of Republicans, 54%, saying they are negative towards foreign investment. Democrats overall, 36% positive, but still 29% negative. We asked them to then, from this list, what they think is the impact of foreign investment in their state. What comes to mind? You see potential foreign influence, 39%. It's the number one of these choices that we provided them. Job creation's number two at 30%, increased tax revenue at 14%. For those who said they were positive on that first question, job creation dominates. 57% say job creation. Not surprisingly, if they started off negative, foreign influence is the potential problem that they identify. Those unsures, a third name potential foreign influence and almost a third job creation. They're still mixed on this question. And then we'll end up with a couple deep dives on social media and on the issue of energy. We wanted to ask voters, first of all, to get as a crosstab, what are the forms of social media they use most often? This is not an exhaustive, what's everything that you have, but name what you use most and what you use next most. And we're including YouTube as a form of social media, although some certainly use it simply as a way to view content. Facebook and Instagram, the Meta properties, come in number 1 and number 2 overall. You can see others registering in lower amounts. But voters are paying attention to social media, thinking about online social media apps like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X, and others. How much have they seen, read, or heard in the news recently about the impact social media is having on our society? 75% of voters say they're either they've seen, read, or heard a lot, they're paying close attention, 40% saying some. There is a lot of focus and they're getting a lot of information on and about the impact social media is having. So we asked them giving them 2 different viewpoints. Not going to read all this text, but one statement saying social media has largely been a positive development for our society, and the other saying social media has been a negative development for our society. Which viewpoint do you agree with? Again, a plurality of voters say social media has been a negative development for our society. 33% say that it's a positive development. When you look across some of these subgroups, you see the groups, how they're paying attention and how they respond in terms of these 2 statements. Republicans, 51% saying social media has largely been negative, only 29 positive. It's more split among Democratic voters, 39 positive to 37 negative. Those independents also largely net negative. African American and Hispanic voters, slightly more positive towards social media net-wise. White voters and those other minority groups more likely to be negative. You can see a huge age gap here. Anyone under the age of 45, for them, social media is their life in many ways. 47% positive, but still 34% negative. And seniors climb all the way to 56% negative. Interesting by usage as well, X and TikTok users, well, they're small subgroups, but some of the most positive towards social media. Those Facebook and Instagram users more split, and the few LinkedIn and Messenger, smaller groups again, but more likely to be net negative. And then finally, closing in on the issue of energy, we asked the same initial question in terms of overall awareness, not as large as those who are paying attention, have seen, read, or heard something about social media, but 58% say they've heard a lot or some. It's not the 75%. That group that says a lot has come down significantly relative to where social media was, but still a majority saying they're paying attention to issues on energy and providing them 2 viewpoints. One, more about the transition to green sources and that government should be pushing this change versus an opposing viewpoint that government should be embracing all forms of U.S. energy, the all of the above approach. Voters very split on this, 37% saying shift to green energy, 39% saying all of the above approach. Not surprisingly, much more of a partisan reaction to this question. Republicans, 53% siding with the statement that government should be encouraging all forms of U.S. energy production. Democrats, 53% saying the shift to green energy. You can also see the age breaks that are happening here and the gender breaks. Male and older voters more likely to say all of the above. Younger and female voters marginally more likely to say shift, and government should be pushing that shift and that change. So if you want to learn more, this video will be up on the Advocus website, and the entire results from the survey will be up tomorrow morning on the Advocus website. Just the takeaways, we're still living in this polarized world going into the 24 elections, but understanding that voters look at issues through the lens of their politics, their personal economic situation, and with that distrust of the bigs, both a distrust of big business and big government. And campaigns, and those that are political and not, that successfully connect with voters are going to start off by understanding their place in that setting. Talk to voters, not past them. And then understanding those messages that communicate given where voters are in this day. So I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have. I'm going to stop the recording. Again, this full presentation will be available later on.